Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. It's widely expected that the GST Constitution Amendment Bill will be passed probably today, but if the speech is run over in the Rajya Sabha, then almost certainly tomorrow. So tonight we ask, how good is this bill? Has the one-year delay improved it? What are the issues that remain to be resolved? How serious are they? And could they still create difficult problems before they are eventually tackled? My guests are the editorial director of the Business Standard, A.K. Bhattacharya, the chief India economist for JP Morgan, Sajid Chinoy, BJP MP Kirat Somaiya, and Congress MP Gaurav Gogoi. Gaurav Gogoi, after your party, the Congress, held up GST for over a year, today it's given its blessings to the bill and it's announced that it will support it. But given that you haven't got the GST rate cap you wanted, given that Mr. Chidambaram is by no means happy with the dispute redressal mechanism as it exists, and thirdly, given that the 1% interstate entry tax would anyway have been waived because the chief economic advisor had given that advice 6 months ago, what has Congress achieved by holding up GST for one whole year?
Karan, we are first of all glad that the GST bill is being listed under discussion in Rajya Sabha. The Congress has always maintained that the GST should be passed, but we had certain reservations against the conditions in the bill. And you have seen that there have been amendments already, which means that the original bill, the original draft form of the bill had flaws. Now, what were some of these flaws? It was the 1% additional tax. The Congress has always been maintaining that this tax is detrimental. It would have indirect tax effect, and this condition was largely imposed in the previous government by the state governments of Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh. That has been waived away, and our condition is also aligned to the Chief Economic Advisory Report, which states that the Congress argument was an argument of principle and simple economics. Second, in the UPA version, in the former Finance Minister Mukherjee's version, we had stated that there needs to be a dispute resolution mechanism. Now, in this current version, we have seen that our voice has been heard. It has said that the GST Council shall identify a dispute resolution mechanism. Had this condition not been there, Karan, in a possible case where a dispute evolves between two states, then there is no mechanism which had been established in the draft NDA version.
Actually, Mr. Gogoi, you're claiming credit for things that, in fact, I'm suggesting that you ought not to claim because you haven't got what you wanted. But if you want to look at the bright side, you have every right to do so. Kirat Somaiya, let me put virtually the opposite question to you. If you are going to concede the scrapping of the 1% entry tax, if you are going to amend the dispute resolution mechanism to make it more acceptable to Congress, why didn't you do that at the outset? Why have you held up this whole process for a year? Because all you've done is you are equally responsible for delaying GST.
It is better to start somewhere. This is a reform, and in reform it is a continuous process. So one has to somewhere take a final decision.
But you could have taken that decision earlier and saved yourself a whole year.
Whatever restraints are there, we tried our best, and then ultimately, because the country has waited for several years, so what we thought, there may be some more corrections, improvement may come later. Let us begin somewhere. It is a new taxation system regime we are adopting. Karan, let me tell you, while implementing, we may come across some more difficulties. The Parliament will be ready to discuss
I fully accept that you will probably come across more difficulties, but what I'm suggesting is that these concessions that you've made today, you could have made a year earlier and saved yourself 14, 15 months. You are equally guilty, as is Congress, for raising political demands. Congress has caved in whereas those demands have not been met, and you have given in to demands you could have given into earlier. But anyway, let's move beyond the polemics to the substance. Sajid Chinoy, the government originally hoped to roll out GST on the 1st of April 2016. Now, if it's lucky, it might just happen on the 1st of April 2017, though most analysts think June 2017 is a more likely date. So let me ask you a simple question. How much has India lost by this 1 year, 14, 15-month delay in GST? What is the cost to the country?
Karan, I'm going to step back and take the longer view here. I know this is not just any reform we're debating. This is game-changing stuff. This is landmark. It's potentially transformative. So, yes, let the good not be the enemy of the best. It would have been better if we began a year earlier. It would have been better if we had as few exemptions as possible. But we're looking at a fundamental overall in terms of how we conduct indirect taxes. This is going to have huge impacts on allocative efficiency down the line, in where firms produce, how they produce, in terms of reducing cascading effects of taxes for consumers, in making production costs and logistics costs cheaper. So the benefits are humongous, but will accrue over time. It's even possible, some other countries have experienced this, that the first year growth could actually dip. But in the medium term, this is unambiguously positive and growth enhancing. So I'm not too fussed at the moment that this is a year late. As long as we've got the basic parameters right, the rate is not too high, the base is sufficiently broad, and we...
I'm going to stop you there because you're making a good point, Sajid. Better late than never, but there are still problems with this bill. Let's come to those. Mr. Bhattacharya, your paper, The Business Standard, has on its front page today identified some of the problems that the states are still concerned with. And it seems that one of the most important, and it was raised by many speakers today in the Rajya Sabha, is the actual compensation to the states. The bill as it exists says that this can be paid for a period that can be extended up to 5 years, which is not a guarantee that the period will be 5 years, because the wording is such the period could be less than 5 years also. And the second problem with the compensation clause is that there's no solid commitment that full compensation will be paid, because the word full is missing. How much of a lacuna is that, and how difficult will it be for the states to accept this if it isn't amended by Mr. Jaitley whenever he gets up to speak?
Well, I think both the concerns that you mentioned are valid concerns. You may well end up seeing that the center may not eventually be obliged to pay the states or compensate the states for the full 5 years. Now, but on the positive side, what you also see is that the GST Council is going to be an empowered body, and the GST Council, with its composition wherein the states have more than equal say in whatever GST Council decides, I would imagine that the compensation issues can be settled in the GST Council. Don't forget that this GST amendment bill actually creates a pretty powerful GST Council, which will have the powers of not only setting the rates, but also referring any disputes to a kind of a body that it thinks is necessary to be sent to. So therefore, I am concerned that the compensation issue is going to be a thorny one for the states. The problem arose actually because the 14th Finance Commission had actually stipulated a compensation formula that would be 100% compensation for the first 3 years, and the fourth year will be 75%, and in the fifth year it will be 50%. And I don't see that that bill is referring to those staged or the graded compensation formula. So it is left to my mind, will be decided by the GST Council, and let us hope that the states and the center actually decide on these issues in a manner that it doesn't become a center versus state issue.
Kirat Somaiya, you've heard A.K. Bhattacharya say that although the compensation clause is not explicit and doesn't actually commit itself to 5 years of full compensation, nonetheless, the fact that the GST Council has the powerful mandate means that the GST Council could remedy this. But the question that I want to put to you is simply this: is the clause on compensation just badly worded? After all, Mr. Chidambaram in his speech pointed out that there's a lot of clumsy wording in this bill. Or does the government really intend that compensation could stop before 5 years? Bad wording, or is this really your intent?
Now everybody knows that the GST Council states have 2/3 voting power. So on the issue of compensation, I think when the states have got 2/3 voting power, if central by error or bad draft also won't be able to withdraw from its commitment. The second point is that, as several experts say, that the first year there may be some negative impact, maybe, but second, third and fourth year we will be everybody will be the gainer, whether it is the state, center or the common consumer or the economy in general.
In other words,
So
what you're
why
suggesting,
there may be concern.
what you're suggesting, Mr. Sumaya, is that there won't be need for 5 years of compensation. You're hopeful that even if there's need for compensation in the first and second years, it won't exist in the third and fourth. And you're also saying, like Mr. Bhattacharya, that the powerful mandate of the GST Council means that the GST Council can remedy any problem in compensation in the actual clause itself. Okay, let's come, Gaurav Gogoi, to what I think for the Congress party is the main unresolved problem. The cap you wanted on the GST rate. The problem is that, in fact, there is no agreement on what that rate should be. So although the cap is left, one hopes or one believes, for the GST bill which will come in the winter session, the bigger problem is there's no agreement on what the rate should be. Today, the Finance Minister of Kerala has told another channel he believes there should be no cap and he believes the rate itself should be in excess of 20%. Mr. Chidambaram was talking of an 18% rate. The economic advisor has talked of a revenue neutral rate of between 15 and 15.5. The National Institute of Public Finance and Policy has spoken of a rate between 23 and 25. And state government finance ministers are talking about a rate between 23 and 27. So your first problem is there is no agreement on what the rate should be. The cap comes after that.
Well, Karan, I feel the burden of evolving a consensus is on the ruling government. All stakeholders will think from their perspective and try to maximize their gain. The various state governments will try to maximize their state revenues as they should. The central government would also therefore need to take a very evolved view where in the end the national priorities are not sacrificed. Remember, this is an indirect tax, and as an indirect tax it will definitely harm or it will definitely impact the poor more than the rich. So therefore, if this government passes a too high rate above 23 or 24%, then the impact will be felt mostly by the poor.
Mr.
So
Gogoi,
I feel, and the Congress party
of a
feels
rate
very
above
strongly,
23,
and this is a demand
24%.
that we continue,
Mr.
that
Chidambaram
18%.
said the rate shouldn't be higher than 18, and in contrast, the Kerala finance minister, who's a communist, says it should be in excess of 20. That's what I'm saying. The problem is, forget about a cap. No one can agree on what the rate itself should be.
Karan, you're interpreting me wrong. We stand by what Chidambaramji said about 18%. What I said earlier, that if it goes above 20% or if it goes as per the Kerala government's view, then the impact will be felt, a negative impact will be felt most by the poor.
That I agree.
Now, our recommendations are in line with what the Chief Economic Advisory report as well.
Absolutely, those are your recommendations, but the problem is
can be passed without a tax rate.
The problem is, and I'll bring in Sajid Chinoy at that point, the problem is, Sajid Chinoy, that there are many people suggesting different rates. The CEA has suggested 3 rates with 15 to 15.5 as the revenue neutral one. The National Institute of Public Finance and Policy has suggested a rate somewhere between 23 and 25. The finance ministers, when they last met, suggested a rate between 23 and 27. The Kerala finance minister made it clear today he wants a rate in excess of 20, and he's a communist, by the way. So let me ask you, as an economist and not as a politician, what do you believe the rate should be? Is there a precise figure you can give me, or at least a small range?
Well, I think the Chief Economic Advisor's work is very sound. Essentially, the way to think about this is, what is the rate that's required, making no assumptions on economic growth because of this reform, that will keep total revenue, center and state, neutral compared to the current system. And Dr. Subramanian's committee has been very clear about that. After extensive analysis, they've come to a conclusion that we frankly agree with, that the sort of standard rate needs to be somewhere between 17 to 18%. You then have a lower rate of 12 and an upper rate of 40%. And remember, this doesn't even take into account some of the dynamic properties, which is that to the extent that this reform increases efficiency down the road, you will see higher economic growth and therefore higher tax collection. So I think a rate of 17 to 18% is eminently sensible, because it is both revenue neutral and at the same time is not so high so as to discourage compliance. The problem with the higher rates are, you can't take a very static mindset, because the rate is very high, you will discourage compliance and undo the very essence of the GST, which is to have a self-policing mechanism of greater compliance.
Mr. Bhattacharya, the rate is one issue on which there is huge divergence. The second issue, I'll come to you in a moment, Gaurav. The second issue, Mr. Bhattacharya, is to do with the issue of a cap, or as Congress now prefers to describe it, ring fencing. How do you impose a cap and yet leave state governments leeway to raise revenue in emergency situations? Your paper today points out that that's a leeway state governments are very keen on. So how can you meet both demands? A cap, and then giving them leeway somehow to raise revenue in emergency situations?
Well, you know, the idea of a cap in the GST amendment bill was definitely, to start with, was a very bad idea. So I'm actually happy that that cap will not be there in the constitutional amendment bill, at least. Now, coming to the question of a cap in the GST, SGST bill and the CGST bill, well, you could have a cap, because this is going to be a level beyond which the tax rate cannot be fixed. But coming to your question, whether the cap should be there or not, it is actually largely a function of what kind of exclusions have we agreed to. Unfortunately,
can I interrupt you, sir? My question is this: how can you, on the one hand, have a cap, and on the other hand, leave room for state governments to raise revenue in emergency situations? Because that's a demand state governments are very keen on. How do you fulfill both together?
I mean, both in the constitutional amendment bill as well as the GST bills that will come subsequently, you have a provision for levying additional duties in cases of emergencies. So I don't rule that possibility out. While we have a cap, there can also be a provision for emergency situation wherein the states will be allowed to levy those additional taxes, and that will be subject to a decision by the GST Council. So I don't see an inherent contradiction in a system wherein the states need that flexibility to levy additional taxes in case they need to do so, provided this is endorsed by GST Council, provided so a cap in a sense is not inimical to the idea of additional taxes by states in case of emergencies.
Well, Gaurav Gogoi, let me bring you in on that, because a cap is something that the Congress is absolutely insistent on. And secondly, Mr. Chidambaram has made it pretty clear in his speech that he believes it should be around 18%. On the other hand, if the GST Council has the powers to permit states in emergency situations to raise revenue by going higher, then who's going to define what is an emergency? Because a state can claim it's an emergency situation and state councils may agree, but it might not be an emergency that requires the cap to be raised. So haven't you got a very ambiguous situation over here?
Well, 2 points, Karan. The first point is why a cap is necessary. A cap is necessary
that we
so
know.
that any possible changes to
we
the
know why a
tax
cap
rate
is
in the
necessary.
future
Come to
goes
the question I asked you. How do you define an emergency so that states can raise that revenue without anyone exploiting the emergency clause?
Karan, if it's in the case of an emergency, this is where the GST Council comes in handy, when the states can deliberate, and it's also incumbent upon the ruling government to find a solution to this in terms of national emergency. Surely this is the role of where the national government, the central government, comes and offers clarity. But the Congress position is very clear. there should be a cap, so the changing the rate is not left to executive whims or the fancies of whoever is ruling, and B, they should be given legal protection.
You know, I get the feeling, Mr. Somaya, that both this issue of what the GST rate should be, as well as the bigger problem of the cap and whether there should be a cap at all, both of these are issues that have been simply kicked down the road. And they now will have to be tackled when the GST bill in the winter session comes to Parliament, and not at this point. But you still don't have a solution to them. Therefore, I want to ask you, does the government have a strategy in mind how to handle these problems? Because you've kicked them down the road, but they've hit you in the face in the winter session. Have you got a strategy, or are you going to play it by ear and hope it goes away?
You are right, because we were discussing, the government was discussing all this issue. And at last somewhere we have to stop. Let us have first step first. And that's why, keeping in mind, if we will have a higher rate, it will go toward the inflation. So we will have to have a balanced rate. But simultaneously, to take all the parties together, states together, a small flexibility clause of emergency also included. And let me tell you, all the parties, state and center, they know their duty. What your fear is right. But let us go one step further.
Okay.
And I know Arun Jaitley, finance minister, has taken into account all the concern. He has assured BJP parliamentary party that there will be a reasonable rate and we will go all together.
You know, Mr. Chinoy, Kirit Somaya was generous enough to say that my fears are right. The truth is, a good, credible, significant first step has been taken, but it's insufficient, and the problems that lie ahead may well be the bigger problems. It's the easier ones that have been sorted out. Deciding on the rate, deciding on the cap, and then deciding what is an emergency so that you ensure states don't exploit it just because they want to raise revenue and have failed to do so, are big issues. Given that they still lie ahead, do you believe GST can actually roll out in April next year? I mean, there are huge things to tackle.
So Karan, you're right that these are big issues, and very often GSTs, succeed or fail because of the devil in the details. So what the base is, what the cap is, how we define emergency are crucially important. I would take, however, a less dim view, because there's nothing to stop rolling out the GST on the 1st of June. This is an indirect tax structure, so we're not necessarily constrained from starting at the beginning of each fiscal year, and if we miss the April 1st deadline, that means we push it back by a year. You can start this in the middle of the year as well. I just make two other quick points. I think the rate issue, after today's debate, I'm less concerned about. I think there is broad agreement here that having a rate that's too high is going to be self-defeating, will be a self-goal, and will reduce compliance.
Okay.
So I think there will be convergence on this number, whether it's 16 or 17 or 18. My bigger raise, we have to be very careful how we define emergencies and states being able to unilaterally raise tax rates. The whole beauty of this is you have a common market with a common tax regime. If tomorrow one state is allowed to raise tax rates under an emergency, that becomes a slippery slope, and then the sanctity of the reform goes away. So we have to define emergency, have a very high bar for how an emergency is classified. That to me is a genuine concern.
Mr. Bhattacharya, there's one other issue that is still probably going to be a problem, and that is the demand made very categorically by Mr. Chidambaram, but it was made by the Samajwadi Party, it was made by the CPM, it was made by many others, that the GST bill that will come in the winter session must be categorized as a finance bill, but not a money bill. But at the same time, Mr. Chidambaram said that when that GST bill comes in the winter session, it has to contain the GST rate. In fact, he even said that if it doesn't contain a GST rate, it could be legally questioned. Now, if a bill contains a GST rate, it is the rate of tax. Then in that case, how can it not be called a money bill? How can you still call it a finance bill? I mean, isn't there a bit of confusion there that could become a real problem?
Yes, of course. I think if the GST bills have to indicate a rate, as the Congress is demanding, it automatically becomes a money bill, which therefore means that it doesn't have to be necessarily passed by Rajya Sabha. Mere assent of Rajya Sabha is good enough, or just being discussed in Rajya Sabha is good enough, and will return in Lok Sabha. So I think you are right there, that if it is going to be, the bills will have to indicate a rate, it automatically will become a money bill. But frankly, the concerns over the GST bill indicating a rate are also a little exaggerated fears, because even if they are put in a GST bill, I don't see it really ties down the government to not review it later or bring it down further.
Absolutely, I agree with that, Mr. Bhattacharya. The reason I'm bringing up this point, and forgive me interrupting you, is that the reason I'm bringing up this point is not because it ties the government's hands down and they can't raise the rate. I'm bringing it up because I think, if I recall correctly, that Mr. Chidambaram categorically said that the Congress's commitment to support the constitutional amendment that is going through today hinges on the GST bill when it comes in winter being a finance bill and not a money bill. But if that same bill has to contain the GST rate, and he said that was essential, then it has to be a money bill. So suddenly, the condition Congress has laid down traps Congress itself.
Well, this is where economics is conflicting with politics. I think political requirement demands that it should not be a money bill, but economic logic demands that the rate should ideally be there. So if you have the rate, then I think it becomes money bill, and the Congress's political expectation that it should come up in the Rajya Sabha where it can actually debate and have some sort of a negotiating room, that gets defeated. So I think it's economics versus politics being played out.
Very quickly, Gaurav Gogoi, do you want to come in and explain how you can have a finance bill which actually specifies the precise GST rate, which would mean that in fact it becomes a money bill, but your man has made it clear, Mr. Chidambaram, that if it's a money bill, you won't support the constitutional amendment. How do you get out of this peculiar situation that he's put your party in?
Is not a peculiar situation, and is certainly not a situation unique to our party. Every political party has supported the claim of the Congress that the bill brought in December should be a finance bill so that it gets deliberated in both houses. Too often, this government has relied on its brute majority in the Lok Sabha to simply shun democracy.
The point is, if the bill specifies the specific rate, it will become a money bill. And if it doesn't specify the specific rate, then Mr. Chidambaram said you won't support it. So this is a bit of confusion that Mr. Chidambaram has introduced. I'm just illuminating it and elucidating it. I'm asking you to explain it. Or can you not?
It's not a confusion at all. There are two things we have mentioned. That A, we are still, Congress party is still pressing for 18% to be included as the rate in the bill that comes up.
That I know.
CGST and the IGST.
But the way you're pressing for it ties your hands into knots.
We said that it should be introduced as the finance bill. If you remember, with the Aadhaar bill, Aadhaar bill was certainly not a money bill, but this government did not follow the norms.
That's a different issue. This one changes because the GST rate has to be specified, as Mr. Chidambaram said. But let me let you off the hook by saying this is a classic case of both wanting your cake and wanting to eat it as well. You want it both ways. You probably got a right to demand it, even if, as Mr. Bhattacharya pointed out, your economic logic and your political logic are in conflict with each other. Let's take a break at that point and come back and ask a critical question. How much will this GST bill, with its imperfections and flaws, add to GDP growth? Will we be disappointed and find that it may not be the widely believed 1 to 1.5%? It could be possibly less. We'll be back in a moment's time for the second part of this critical discussion.